7. The Danger of Sentiment. After leaving Drummond's house, Anthony Trent started without intemperate haste for his comfortable apartment. In accordance with his instructions, Mrs. Kinney retired not later than 10. There might come a night when he needed to prove the alibi that she could unconsciously nullify if she waited up for him. In these early days of his career he was not much in fear of detection, and approached his door with little of the trepidation he was to experience later, when his name was unknown still, but his reputation exceedingly high with the police. Later he knew he must arrange his mode of life with greater care. New York, for example, is not an easy city for a man fleeing from police pursuit. Its brilliant lighting, its sleeplessness, the rectangular blocks and absence of helpful back alleys, all these were aids to the law-abiding. He had not chosen his location heedlessly. From the roof on which he often slept he could see 5 feet distant from its boundary the wall that circumscribed the top of another house such as his, but having its entrance on a side street. It would not be hard to get a key to fit the front door, and since he would make use of it infrequently and then only late at night, there was little risk of detection. Thinking several moves ahead of his game was one of Trent's means to ensure success. He must have some plausible excuse in case he were caught upon the roof. The excuse that suggested itself instantly was a cat. He bought a large and frolicsome cat, tiger-striped and a stealthy hunter by night, and introduced him to Mrs. Kinney. That excellent woman was not pleased. A cat, she asserted, needed a garden. Exactly, agreed her employer, a roof garden. So it was that Agrippa joined the household and sought to prey upon twittering sparrows. And since Agrippa, looking 70 feet below, was not in fear of falling, he leaped the intermediate distance between the roofs and was rewarded with a sparrow. Thereafter he used what roof offered the best hunting. 2 maiden ladies occupied the topmost flat, the Misses Sawyer, and were startled one evening at a knock upon their door. An affable young gentleman begged permission to retrieve his cat from their roof. The hunting Agrippa had sprung the dreadful space, and feared, he asserted plausibly, to get back. The Misses Sawyer loved cats, it seemed, but had none now, fearing to seem disloyal to the memory of a peerless beast about whom they could not talk without tear-flooded eyes. They told their neighbour cordially that whenever Agrippa strayed again he was to make free of the roof. "Ring our bell," said one of them, "and we'll let you in." "But how did you get in?" the other sister demanded suddenly. "The door was open," he said blandly. "That's that dreadful Mr. Dietz again," they cried in unison. "He drinks, and when he goes out to the saloon he puts the catch back so there won't be the bother of a key. I've complained, but the janitor takes no notice. I suppose we don't offer him cigars and tips, so he takes the part of Dietz." By this simple manoeuvre Anthony Trent established his right to use the roof without incurring suspicion. The Drummond loot proved not to be despised by one anxious to put $100,000 to his credit. The actual amount was $3,800. Furthermore, there was some of the Drummond stationery, a bundle of letters, and the 2 or 3 things he had taken hastily from young Bulstrode's room. He regretted there had been so small an opportunity to investigate the Bulstrode mansion, but time had too great a value for him. The Black Pearl had flung itself at him, and some Yale keys and assorted club stationery. These were all he could take. The stationery might prove useful. He had discovered that fact in the Conington Warren affair. If it had not been that the butler crept out of the dark hall to watch him as he left the Bulstrode house, he would have tried the keys on the hall door. That could be done later. It is not every rich house which is guarded by burglar-resisting devices. It was the bundle of letters and IOUs that he examined with peculiar care. They were enclosed in a long blue envelope on which was written "Private and Personal." When Trent had read them all, he whistled. "These will be worth 10 times his measly 3,800," he said softly. But there was no thought of blackmail in his mind. That was a crime at which he still wholesomely rebelled. It occurred to him sometimes that a life such as his tended to lead to progressive deterioration, that there might come a time when he would no longer feel bitterly toward blackmailers. It was part of his punishment, this dismal thought of what might be unless he reverted to the ways of honest men. Inasmuch as a man may play a crooked game decently, so Anthony Trent determined to play it. Many of the letters in the blue envelope were from women whose names were easily within the ken of one who studied the society columns of the metropolitan dailies. Most of them seemed to have been the victims of misplaced bets at Belmont Park or rash bidding at auction. There was one letter from the wife of a high official at Washington begging him on no account to let her husband know she had borrowed money from him. A prominent society golfing girl whose play Trent had a score of times admired for its pluck and skill had borrowed $1,000 from Drummond. There was her IOU on the table. Scrawling a line on Drummond stationery in what seemed to be Drummond handwriting, Anthony Trent sent it back to her. There were acknowledgments of borrowings from the same kind of rich waster that Graham Bulstrode represented. A score of prominent persons would have slept the better for knowing that their IOUs had passed from Drummond's keeping. The man was more of a usurer than banker. What interested Anthony Trent most of all was a collection of letters signed N.G. and written on the stationery of a very exclusive club. It was a club to which Drummond did not belong. The first letter was merely a request that Drummond meet the writer in the library of the athletic club where Anthony Trent had seen him. The second was longer and spelled a deeper distress. "It's impossible in a case like this," wrote N.G., "to get any man I know well to endorse my note. If I could afford to let all the world into my secret I should not have come to you. You know very well that as I am the only son your money is safe enough. I must pay this girl $50,000 or let my father know all about it. He would be angry enough to send me to some God-forsaken ranch to cut wild oats." The third letter was still more insistent. The writer was obviously afraid that he would have to beg the money from his father. "I have always understood," he wrote, "that you would lend any amount on reasonable security. I want only $50,000, but I've got to have it at once. It's quite beyond my mother's power to get it for me this time. I've been to that source too often, and the old man is on to it. E.G. insists that the money in cash must be paid to her on the morning of the 18th, when she will call at the house with her lawyer. I am to receive my letters back, and she will leave New York. Let me know instantly." The next letter indicated that William Drummond had decided to lend N.G. the amount, but that his offer came too late. "I wish you had made up your mind sooner," said N.G. "It would have saved me the devil of a lot of worry, and you could have made money out of it. As it is, my father learned of it somehow. He talked about the family honor as usual, but the result is that when she and her lawyer call at 10 on Thursday morning the money will be there. No cheque for her. She's far too clever. But 50,000 in crisp new notes. As for me, I am to reform. That means I have to go downtown every morning at 9 and work in my father's brokerage business. Can you imagine me doing that? I blame you for it, Drummond. You're too cautious by a damn sight to please me." Anthony Trent was thus put into possession of the following facts: that a Richmond son, initials only known, had got into some sort of a scrape with a girl, initials were E.G., who demanded $50,000 in cash, which was to be paid at the residence of the young man's father. The date set was Thursday the 18th. It was now the early morning of Tuesday the 16th. Trent had lists of the members of all the best clubs. He went through the one on whose paper N.G. had written. There were several members with those initials. Careful elimination left him with only one likely name, that of Norton Guestwick. Norton Guestwick was the only son and heir of a very rich broker. The elder Guestwick posed as a musical critic, had a box in the Golden Horseshoe, and patronized such opera singers as permitted it. Many a time Anthony Trent had gazed on the Guestwick family seated in their compelling box from the modest seat that was his. Guestwick had even written a book, Operas I've Seen, which might be found in most public libraries. It was an elaborately illustrated tome which reflected his shortcomings as a critic no less than his vanity as an author. A collector of musical books, Trent remembered buying it with high hopes and being disgusted at its smug ineffectiveness. He had seldom seen Norton in the family box, but the girls were seldom absent. They too upheld the arts. Long ago he had conceived a dislike for Guestwick. He hated men who beat what they thought was time to music whose composers had other ideas of it. Turning up a recent file of Gotham gossip, he came upon a reference to the Guestwick heir. "We understand," said this waspish but usually veracious weekly, "that Norton Guestwick's attention to pretty Estelle Grandcourt, née Sadie Court, has much perturbed his aristocratic parents, who wish him to marry a smug fortune and a girl suited to be their daughter-in-law. It is not violating a confidence to say that the lady in question occupies a mansion on Commonwealth Avenue and is one of the most popular girls in Boston's smart set." While many commentators will puzzle themselves over the identity of the dark lady of the immortal sonnets, few could have failed to perceive that E.G. was almost certain to be Estelle Grandcourt. Sundry tests of a confirmatory nature proved it without doubt. He had thus 2 days in which to make his preparations to annex the $50,000. There were difficulties. In these early days of his adventuring, Anthony Trent made no use of disguises. He had so far been but himself. Vaguely he admitted that he must sooner or later come to veiling his identity. For the present exploit it was necessary that he should find out the name of the Guestwick butler. He might have to get particulars from Clark. But even Clark's help could not now be called in, and it was upon this seemingly unimportant thing that his plan hinged. In a disguise such as many celebrated cracksmen had used, he might have gained the kitchen door and learned by what name Guestwick's man called himself. Or he might have found it out from a tradesman's lad. But to ask, as Anthony Trent, what might link him with a robbery was too risky. Unfortunately for Charles Newman Guestwick, his book, which had cost Trent $2 and was thrown aside as worthless, supplied the key to what was needed. It was the wordy, garrulous book that only a multimillionaire author might write and have published. The first chapter, My Childhood, was succeeded by a lofty disquisition on music. Later there came revelations of the Guestwick family life, with portraits of their various homes. The music room had a chapter to itself. Reading on, Anthony Trent came to the chapter headed, rather cryptically, After the Opera. "It is my custom," wrote the excellent Guestwick, "to hold in my box an informal reception after the performance is ended. My wide knowledge of music, of singers and their several abilities lends me, I venture to say, a unique position among amateurs. We rarely sup at hotel or restaurant after the performance. In my library, where there is also a grand piano (we have 3 such instruments in our New York home and 2 more at Lenox), Mrs. Guestwick and my daughters talk over what we've heard, criticizing here, lauding there, until a simple repast is served by the butler who always waits up for us. The rest of the servants have long since retired. My library consists of perhaps the most valuable collection of musical literature in the world. I have mentioned in another chapter the refining influence of music on persons of little education. John Briggs, my butler, is a case in point. He came to me from Lord Fitzhosken's place in Northamptonshire, England. The Fitzhoskens are immemoriably associated with fox hunting and the steeplechase, and all Briggs heard there in the way of music were the cheerful rollicking songs of the hunt breakfast. I sent him to see Götterdämmerung. He told me simply that it was a revelation to him. He doubted in his uneducated way whether Wagner himself comprehended what he had written. There were 30 other chapters in Mr. Guestwick's book. In all he revealed himself as a pompous ass assured only of tolerance among a people where money consciousness had succeeded that of caste. But Anthony Trent felt kindly toward him, and the money he had spent was likely to earn him big dividends if things went well. Caruso sang on the night preceding the morning on which Estelle Grandcourt was to appear and claim her heart balm. This meant a large attendance, for tenors may come and go, press agents may announce other golden-voiced singers, but Caruso holds his pride of place honestly won and generously maintained. It had been Trent's experience that the Guestwicks rarely missed a big night. It was at 9:30 Anthony Trent groaned that a professional engagement compelled him to leave the Metropolitan. He had spent money on a seat, not this time for an evening of enjoyment, but to make certain that the Guestwicks were in their box. There was Charles Newman Guestwick beating fast time with a pudgy hand. His lady, weighted with Guestwick jewels, tried to create the impression that, after all, Caruso owed much of his success to her amiable patronage. The two daughters upheld the Guestwick tradition by being exceedingly affable to those greater than they, and using lorgnettes to those who strove to know the Guestwicks. Mr. John Briggs, drinking a mug of ale and wondering who was winning a light-weight contest at a national sporting club, was resting in his sitting-room. He liked these long opera evenings, which gave him the opportunity to rest, as much as he despised his employer for his inordinate attendance at these meaningless entertainments. He shuddered as he remembered the Twilight of the Gods. At 10 o'clock, when Mr. Briggs was nodding in his chair, the telephone bell rang. Over the wire came his employer's voice. It was not without purpose that Anthony Trent's unusual skill in mimicry had been employed. As a youth he had acquired a reputation in his home town for imitations of Henry Irving, Bryan, Otis Skinner, and their like. "Is this you, Briggs?" demanded the supposed Mr. Guestwick. "Yes, sir," returned Briggs. "I wish you to listen carefully to my instructions," he was commanded. "They are very important." "Certainly, sir," the man returned. He sensed a something, almost agitation, in the usually placid voice. "I hope there's nothing serious, sir." "There may be," the other said. "That I can't say yet. See that everyone goes to bed but you. Send them off at once. You must remain up until a man in evening dress comes to the front door and demands admittance. It will be a detective. Show him at once to the library and leave him absolutely undisturbed. Absolutely undisturbed, Briggs, do you understand?" "I'll do as you say, sir," Briggs answered, troubled. He was sure now that serious, sinister things were afoot, and wished the Guestwicks had been as well disposed to dogs in the house as had been that hard-drinking, reckless Lord Fitzhosken. Suddenly an important thought came to him. "Is there any way of making sure that the man who comes is the detective?" "I'm glad you're so shrewd, Briggs," said the millionaire. "It had not occurred to me that an impostor might come. Say to the man, 'What is your errand?' I shall instruct him to answer, 'I've come to look at Mr. Guestwick's rare editions.'" "Very good, sir," said Briggs. "Unless he answers that, do not admit him. You understand?" "Perfectly," the butler made answer. At 10:30 a man in evening dress rang the door of the Guestwick mansion. He was a tall man with a hard look and a biting, gruff voice. Briggs interposed his sturdy body between the stranger and the entrance. "What is your errand?" said Briggs suavely. "I've come to look at Mr. Guestwick's rare editions," he was told. "Step inside," urged Briggs with cordiality. "Everybody in bed?" the man snapped. "Except me," said the butler. "Anyone here except the servants?" "We have no house guests," said Briggs. We don't keep a deal of company." "Show me to the library," the stranger commanded. Briggs, now stately and offended, led the way. Briggs resented the tone the detective used. In his youth the butler had been handy with the gloves. It was for this reason he was taken into service by the fox-hunting nobleman, so that he might box with his lordship every day before breakfast. Briggs would have liked the opportunity to put on the gloves with this frowning, overbearing, hawk-nosed detective. "You've got your orders?" cried the stranger. "I have," Briggs answered, a trace of insolence perceptible. "Then get out, and don't worry me. Remember this, answer no phone messages or doorbells. My men outside will attend to the people who want to get into this house." Briggs tried new tactics. He was feverishly anxious to find out what was suspected. "As man to man," Briggs began with a fine affability. Imperiously he was ordered from the room. Anthony Trent sank into a chair and laughed gently. Had it all been so absurdly easy? 2 good hours were before him. None would interrupt. It was known that young Norton had been bundled out of town until his charmer had disappeared. Gotham gossip had told him so much. It was almost certain that the Guestwicks would not return to their home until 12:30. That would give him a sufficient time to examine every likely-looking place in the house. The old-time crook would no doubt have hit Mr. Briggs over the head with a blackjack and run a risk in the doing of it. The representative of the newer school had simply sent all the servants to bed. Looking quickly about the great apartment, book-lined and imposing, Trent's eyes fell on an edition in 20 fat volumes of Penroy's Encyclopedia of Music and Art. Scrutiny told the observer that behind these steel-bound fake books there was a safe. It was an old dodge, this. If the money for Miss Grandcourt was not here, there were, no doubt, negotiable papers and jewels. This was just the sort of sacrosanct spot where valuables might be laid away. To pry open the glass door of the bookcase, roll back the works of the unknown Penroy, and come face to face with the old-fashioned safe took less than 2 minutes. It was amazing that so shrewd a man as Guestwick must be in business matters should rely on this. It was rather that he relied on the integrity of his servants and an efficient system of burglar alarm. From the cane that Anthony Trent had carelessly thrown on a chair he took some finely tempered steel drills and presently assembled the tools necessary to his task. As a boy he had been the rare kind who could take a watch apart and put it together again and have no parts left over. It was largely owing to an inborn mechanical skill that he had persuaded himself he could make good at his calling. It was striking 11 by the ship's clock, 6 bells, when he rolled the doors open. He rose to his feet and stretched. Kneeling before the safe had cramped his muscles. Sinking into a big black leathern chair he contemplated the strong box that was now at his mercy. He allowed himself the luxury of a cigarette. There passed before his mind's eye a vista of pleasant shaded pools wherein big trout were lying. Weems did not own the only desirable camp on Kennebago. He was suddenly called back from this dreaming, this castle building, to a realization that such prospects might never be his. It was the low, pleasant tones of a cultivated woman's voice which wrought the amazing change. "I suppose you're a burglar," the voice said. There was no trace of nervousness in her tone. He sprang to his feet and looked round. Not 20 feet distant he saw her. She was a tall, graceful girl about 22 or 3, clad in a charming evening gown. Over her white arm trailed a fur cloak, costly and elegant. And, although the moment was hardly one for thinking of female charms, he was struck by her unusual beauty. She possessed an air of extreme sophistication, and stood looking at him as if the man before her were some unusual and bizarre specimen of his kind. Chapter 7